This is Johnny Manziel, the greatest player to ever play for Texas A&M, and many people know him as one of the most legendary quarterbacks in the history of college football.
Got him. No, they didn't. Oh, my gracious. Yep. How about that?
But although everybody knew about Johnny football on the field, many people didn't know about Johnny Manziel off the field, and the things that he did that almost prevented him from being one of the greatest college quarterbacks of all time. So today I am putting Johnny Manziel into College Football 25. Let's take a look back on his college career as we follow him on his road to glory. Now, coming out of high school, Johnny was a 3 or 4-star recruit depending on where you're looking at. But he had played so well in high school that he became a hometown hero. So it turned out that he actually had a bunch of schools that wanted to bring him in, including teams like the Oregon Ducks. And that was the team that Johnny almost signed with early on in the recruiting cycle. But when he thought about it, he actually wanted to stay closer to home. So he decided to sign with Texas A&M. Now, when Johnny got to camp, he decided to redshirt his freshman season, meaning that he would still be able to come back the following year as a freshman and compete for the starting job. And after not really doing so well during practice in his true freshman season, as a redshirt freshman, it seems like Johnny Manziel has a lot to offer this Texas A&M offense, and they decided to roll with him as the starter going into the season opener. But this is probably the part where I'll tell you guys that this will not be your average road to glory, because Johnny Manziel is not your average quarterback.
One of Texas A&M's potential starting quarterbacks was arrested early this morning at Northgate. Patrol officers say they saw two men fighting. One of the two was Manziel.
This guy, Johnny Manziel, got arrested before he ever even played a damn game. But luckily for him, he had an excellent coaching staff that found a way to circumvent the system. And despite all the headlines that were surrounding his name at the time, Johnny Manziel would be ready to start in his first ever college football game, and it would be at home against the Florida Gators. Now, Johnny Manziel during his college debut was already proving that he was capable of bringing up some magic from time to time, coming up with multiple big plays downfield that helped his team move the sticks. But this first game would definitely be marked as a lesson for him going forward, and his first real taste of college football. But even though Johnny had been struggling a lot at many points throughout this game, he was still coming up with quite a few big plays that nobody thought a freshman should be making. Like this one where he rolled out to his right and threw back across his body to pick up a first down for his team.
Can't teach that, can you?
There was a 4th down and 12 where he was also rolling out right and found a way to throw an absolute laser towards the corner of the end zone for a touchdown. And in the coach's eyes, he had already solidified his spot as the starting quarterback for the rest of the season. Unfortunately, by the end of this game, things just did not go the way that Texas A&M wanted them to go, and Johnny Manziel would end up losing the first game of his college football career. But you see, the thing about Johnny Manziel is that he was not going to let that loss define him, because he sort of adopted a mentality early on that went along the lines of win or lose, we booze. And it wouldn't be long before Johnny would find himself back in the headlines, this time for partying with some hot girls in a Scooby-Doo costume, so not really much for people to hate on. But even though he went out during the week, he was still ready to try to lock in and get Texas A&M their first W of the season. Now, in this game, Johnny was once again showing that he had a little bit of mobility to him, helping his team pick up multiple first downs, but he also showed that he had a little bit of an arm on him too, making quite a few big-time throws throughout this game, this one here to get A&M across the goal line for their first score of the night. And it wouldn't be the last time that he shows off his big-time arm, because later on, even though A&M was backed up in their own red zone, they would take a shot downfield, and Johnny Manziel would deliver a dime, making a throw that would end up being caught by a receiver, and as he breaks off a couple tacklers, he gets in the end zone for another touchdown for A&M, extending their lead to 2 possessions. But with Texas State starting to fight back, Johnny realizes that he has to keep making some plays, so he takes it upon himself to scramble out of the pocket, stiff arm 57's face to the turf, and make his way down to the 1-yard line. And on the very next play, he would roll out to his left and basically jump a pass over multiple defenders for a touchdown, pushing the A&M lead back to 2 possessions and giving them tons of momentum going forward, because later on in the game, Johnny would once again take it upon himself to scramble out of the pocket, but this time for a touchdown, getting in for a score that not only puts A&M's lead to 3 possessions, but does enough to put this game away. Johnny Manziel would lead his team to a victory in the second game of the season, and now things were rolling. He would go on to win player of the game, and you can just expect that he wins it every single week from here on out. But like I said, man, Johnny's motto is win or lose, we booze. And he just won his first ever college football game, so what do you think he's about to do? This dude went out there and partied all weekend. He even partied on Walkthrough Thursday. Unfortunately though, he and his friends were being kinda loud, so the RA came to his room and he got in a little bit of trouble. And now Johnny wasn't trying to get in any trouble at all, but he just wanted to have fun and live his life. But on Saturdays, Johnny knew that he was going to be locked in on trying to help his team deliver victories. And this next Saturday, Johnny would be going on the road for his upcoming game against Arizona State. Now in his first game on the road, Johnny Manziel was lighting it up, throwing an absolute piss missile in between 3 defenders that went in for a touchdown. And that was definitely a nice little play, but the magic was only beginning to be made, because Johnny was doing an excellent job extending plays and making throws that had people looking at him a little bit differently. You gotta remember, this kid was just a freshman, so whenever he made a great play, it was crazy. But whenever he made a bad one, it was pretty normal. But even though he would make a bad play sometime, most of the time he or his teammates were coming up with plays that would get his team across the goal line for a touchdown. A score that extends A&M's lead to 3 possessions and also does enough to put an end to this game, with Texas A&M going on to finish it off 28-7. And Johnny Manziel leading the way with over 200 yards and 3 touchdowns in the air and another touchdown on the ground to go with it. Johnny had been playing very well, especially for a freshman up to this point in the season, but he felt like he was really only just getting started and knew that he had a lot more that he could do on the field if given the opportunity. So he was looking forward to taking advantage of every opportunity that he got in his next game against Arkansas State. And it turns out that Johnny would have an opportunity early, because after escaping out of the pocket on this play, he would break off a couple tacklers and find himself zooming down the sideline for the first points of the game for either team. An incredible play by somebody who's probably one of the younger people on the field. And he would continue to have some excellent moments by extending plays and getting the ball out to a receiver who got across the goal line for another score later on, tying the game up at 14 and allowing him an opportunity later in the second quarter to throw a ball up deep to his receiver that was not only caught, but brought all the way to the end zone for a touchdown to take the lead for Texas A&M. This guy Johnny was doing stuff that A&M hadn't seen in a long time, if not ever. And it got even worse after he would go out there and say, "Hey, skip-a-doo-bop," dive into the end zone for a touchdown. This kid was truly something different, and Texas A&M fans started to notice. And the opposing team would also know too, as he goes out there and throws another dime towards the right side of the field, putting up some more points for A&M as they would go on to win this game 49-28. And with Johnny Manziel playing so well up to this point, it was no surprise that he felt liberated to do whatever he wanted to do. He did spend a little bit of his free time trying to work on becoming a better football player, but most of his nights he was trying to go out and have a good time. And TMZ would often catch him trying to do so. And at this point, Johnny's coaches were willing to deal with his shenanigans as long as he kept putting up some numbers. Texas A&M had never really had a weapon at quarterback like this throughout their history, so the athletic department was not just going to throw that all away just because Johnny wants to have a tequila sunrise or a Bloody Mary cocktail from time to time. Either way, people still expected him to keep playing well in his next game against LSU. Now, even though this A&M offense wasn't playing up to standard throughout the first half, Johnny was definitely doing his part. For whatever reason though, this A&M offense was not able to get things going throughout this first half, continuously being stopped on third down up until there was about 30 seconds left in the second quarter, because Johnny would start coming up with plays that would not only get his team downfield, but finally in a position to potentially score. And with about 15 seconds left down at the goal line, Johnny had found a way to scramble his way across for a touchdown that brought this game back to a 1-score deficit heading into halftime. But in this game, there were a lot of guys not named Johnny Manziel that did not show up ready to play. And by the end of the game, even though Johnny Manziel was doing his thing all throughout, it still wouldn't be enough, as Texas A&M would go on to lose to LSU 17-14. And this was a pretty bad loss, considering that this wasn't even the team that most fans were scared for Texas A&M to play.
At that point, it was like, this has been fun. You know, the little white kid running around making plays, it's been fun for a while, but welcome to reality. Here comes Alabama.
The entire country was ready to watch Johnny Manziel walk into Tuscaloosa and take another loss on his season. Another big thing that I gotta mention was that this was Texas A&M's first year in the SEC, and it was safe to say that a lot of people had no faith in A&M matching up with the teams in the conference, and most certainly not when they were going on the road to face off against the Alabama Crimson Tide. Now this was a game where A&M started off hot. Johnny Manziel was finding guys open left and right and was helping his team continuously move the sticks. On the opening drive, he was doing an excellent job avoiding pressure and even found a way to escape out to his right and pick up some big yardage. He moved his team all the way upfield inside Alabama's goal-to-goal territory, where a few plays later the drive would end after he gets sacked in the backfield and they are forced to settle for 3. And after getting the ball right back with excellent field position, they settle for another field goal. but it felt like that might be their last one of the game, because later on Johnny was able to scramble up the middle for a touchdown, extending A&M's lead to 13. But Johnny did not want to stop there. He wanted to light Alabama up, and he was doing a great job of it after he throws his first touchdown here, extending Alabama's lead to 3 possessions, and he came back to the sideline fired up. He was out there talking about fuck Alabama, fuck Nick Saban, we're about to get another touchdown right here. Later on, A&M's up 27-0. Johnny scrambles out of the pocket, he says, hey, moving the chains yet again for A&M. It almost felt like there were times where the defense just could not catch him, and they definitely couldn't on this drive as he bought himself time to throw another touchdown, putting up another score in this one that would finally be enough to put an end to this game. Texas A&M went on to beat Alabama and absolutely shocked the world. There was nobody who thought, even with Johnny Manziel playing as well as he had been, that he would help lead this team to a victory in Tuscaloosa. But somehow he did it, and now Johnny Manziel was on top of the world. And he knew that there were greater things that lied ahead for him on the field. Off the field, though, he had no idea what he was about to get himself into. Because it turned out that his friend Nate got an opportunity for him to sign some autographs for $3,000. And considering that Johnny only had less than $100 in his bank account, he didn't really care what happened because he was definitely going to take the deal. But it turned out that deal would actually parlay into another opportunity. Because when finishing up the deal for $3,000, some guy came up to Johnny and told him that if he signed stuff for him, he'll give him $30,000. And now all of a sudden Johnny Manziel and his friend Nate are making more money than they ever have in their entire life. Plus, Johnny is one of the top quarterbacks in the country. And considering that he was starting to get some serious recognition as a Heisman favorite, Johnny felt like he was on the right track and doing what he was supposed to be doing. Was signing autographs for money a major NCAA violation at the time? Yes, but that's okay. Because on the field, Johnny's legacy was about to evolve from Johnny Manziel to Johnny Football. Johnny came out in his next game playing as well, if not better than he has all season. He was throwing dimes all over the field all game, just like this one he threw to the left side that barely made it over the top and allowed his receiver to not only make the catch, but eventually get in for the score, ultimately putting up another point for A&M in the win column, as they go on to finish off another game led by Johnny Manziel. And remember, this whole time, Johnny Manziel is barely spending any time working on football. It just turns out that he's naturally gifted, so he actually spends most of his time doing whatever this is. I don't want to jump to any conclusions, but maybe it's some cocaine. Which, if true, that would be extra crazy to think that he was popping out in SEC matchups and stand calmly in the pocket to deliver NFL caliber throws, allowing his team to get across the goal line for scores. Against Kentucky, Manziel was definitely adding to his Heisman campaign as he continued to escape out of the pocket and find ways to get the ball downfield to his teammates. This was easily unlike anything A&M has ever seen before. This dude, Johnny, while being completely hungover, would be able to stand in the pocket, take a hit while delivering a throw, and the throw would still result in a touchdown. This kid was making a case that he might be the best player in the country, because at this point he and Texas A&M were on a roll, and he was about to continue it into his next game against Georgia. The thing about Johnny Manziel that made it so hard for defenses to guard him was that he was always one of the quickest players on the field. It seems like even when the defense had him boxed in or wrapped up, he would still find a way to wiggle out of it and either pick up a first down or even a touchdown. But obviously, even when he wasn't using his legs, his arm would be more than good enough. And his consistency of being able to get down the field and get his team across the goal line was unmatched throughout the country, helping his team pick up yet another win as they continue on throughout their season. And as Johnny was beginning to be seen on top of the leaderboard for the Heisman voting, he also started to begin being spotted out at parties with Drake. This felt like a time in his life where Johnny was living the life of a rock star. Being able to hang out with celebrities on Friday night and then score touchdowns on Saturday, well, there was just nothing better. It even made him want to do snow angels sometimes. But after Johnny kept finding ways to get his team in position for scores, or even find ways to lead them to victory, it became evidently clear that Johnny Manziel was one of the top football players in the country. He was definitely adored as such by the fans. Throughout the rest of the season, the coaching staff just let Johnny Manziel pretty much do whatever he wanted and play freely on the field. And against Ole Miss, it was another shock to the country that he was helping his team compete. Ole Miss was definitely a solid squad, but throughout the second half, it felt like they had no way of stopping Johnny Manziel in this A&M offense. Because by the end of the fourth quarter, Johnny had brought his team back down to the goal line and simply rolled out right before getting in the end zone for another score to give A&M another tally in the win column. They go on to win 33-14, and of course Johnny does his thing. But this upcoming week is a big week, because it's the week before the Heisman. And A&M knows that they can make a lot of money if Johnny wins it, so they put him out there to do a press conference to hopefully sway any voters.
What is the craziest thing a fan's done for you?
I did see people in Scooby-Doo costumes at the game the other day, so I'm gonna put that up there at the top.
Now Johnny would come out in his final game of the season against Oklahoma, and he was throwing lasers all over the field. And by the end of the game, his arm and his legs were just way too much for Oklahoma, and he would go on to help lead A&M to a victory in their last game of the season, 31-17. But now that the season was finally over, it was time for the moment of truth.
Might this be the year the final class barrier is broken down by the voters, a first ever freshman to win the Heisman?
Now, it did turn out that Johnny would go on to win Player of the Year, but it didn't quite yet mean that he'd go on to win the Heisman.
2012 winner of the Heisman Memorial Trophy is Johnny Manziel.
Johnny Manziel had finally made history in more ways than one, becoming the second Heisman winner in the history of A&M, winning it for the first time since John David Crow in 1957, and on top of that becoming the first ever freshman to ever win the award at any position. People were celebrating back at his college, and they were celebrating back at his home in Kerrville. He had truly done something extremely special, but little did everybody know that this would only be just the beginning, but not of what you think. Because Johnny Manziel's celebrity status had just reached an all-time high. He was hanging out with people like Floyd Mayweather and Justin Bieber. He was pretty much doing this as a way to get himself ready for the games, and it definitely worked in the final game of his freshman season as he scrambled in for a touchdown to take the early 7-0 lead, and let the entire stadium know exactly who he is just in case they didn't know. And even though he had done it all year, it was absolutely astounding watching Johnny Manziel do the things that he was doing. And I don't know if it was because he was a freshman or the fact that he was still crossfaded while playing in a lot of these games. But one thing that people started to see for sure was that Johnny Manziel was the truth. And in the final game of his season, he continued to prove it, throwing a touchdown late in the fourth quarter that would seal it, and at this point cap off the most incredible season in the history of college football. Now, as far as Johnny's stats, he threw for over 3,600 yards and actually led the SEC in rushing. I would say that Heisman was definitely deserved considering that he stamped his name in the record book multiple times. But unfortunately, going into the offseason, his coaches did not realize how bad his behavior would be without football, because Johnny would find himself amidst quite a few controversies.
There is a code of conduct for the reigning Heisman winner, and he violated it once again.
Then there was the whole frat party thing.
Manziel was reportedly quickly and harshly removed from a frat party.
Oh yeah, and the Manning Passing Academy thing.
Manziel caught a lot of heat from the media after leaving the Manning Passing Academy.
Some reports say Manziel was hungover and missed camp.
What happened?
Nothing more than overslept.
But none of these would compare to when Johnny would go into his sophomore season, and his little autograph side hustle began to unravel.
Texas A&M quarterback Johnny Manziel accused of signing sports memorabilia for money.
Manziel is accused of signing autographs for money another time at the national championship games. And you see, signing for money is an NCAA violation that could result in a suspension for the reigning Heisman Trophy winner.
Now, luckily, Johnny would be able to escape another lengthy suspension after it turns out they couldn't prove that he took any money to sign anything. So now Manziel was just free to go into his sophomore season and dominate as much as he could, hopefully increasing his draft stock. And believe it or not, folks, this guy Johnny was actually having a better individual season than he did the previous year. He was running around and still slinging the rock downfield, scoring touchdowns, and had no problem being the leader that he was as a freshman. He would lead his team to a lot of good wins throughout his sophomore season, despite still being caught by the paparazzi out partying every weekend. Sometimes he'd even be partying during the week just for no reason. And eventually teams would start to take notice, and it would start to have an effect on his draft stock, because he was no longer looked at as a top 10 or even top 5 overall pick like he once was. The crazy thing is that Johnny was still out there leading his team on the field every Saturday, and a lot of times they were winning. And like I said, he was having an even better year this year than he was the previous season. And it was largely due to the fact that Mike Evans, a future Hall of Fame NFL wide receiver, was doing a lot to step up this year, coming up with a lot of touchdowns that helped Johnny Manziel make his own numbers look good. But even though Johnny was having a great season as a sophomore, there were still times where he was doing too much and got his team in quite a bit of trouble. Oftentimes just throwing blatantly stupid picks, and he would try to sit back and use an excuse like he was hurt or something. Like, brother, no you weren't. You were just out there too busy partying, that's all. Too busy spending his autograph money going to courtside games for the Dallas Mavericks. But at some point it had just become clear that Johnny was ready to leave Bryan College Station. I mean, he quite literally tweeted about it, so it couldn't even become more clear. By the end of the season, he was more than ready to get into his final game of his college football career. He had led A&M right back to another bowl game, and of course playing as well as he had over the past 2 years, he definitely didn't really have too much of a problem in this game. And he would end up going on to lead A&M in a victory in the final game of his career, capping off a legendary career that many people really had no idea what he was doing behind closed doors. And with Johnny Manziel leaving, it would actually be the end of an era with his home stadium of Kyle Field being torn down. It was time for A&M and Johnny football to head into a new era, as he had entered his name into the NFL draft, and now he has to deal with professional level drug tests.
Which I come to find out on my own, it was their like 4-string backup quarterback that was pissing for him at A&M.
But this was the story of Johnny Manziel. If you want to see more videos like this, be sure to get this one to 1,000 likes and subscribe to the channel down below. But also be sure to comment down below who else you guys want to see next. And don't forget to check out some of these other stories until the next one comes out. If you got to this point in the video, just know that I appreciate you more than you'll ever know. And other than that, I'm going to catch you guys next time.